On a crisp autumn morning in downtown Los Angeles, life was about to take an unexpected turn for one of the city's most successful entrepreneurs. Michelle Richardson, founder and CEO of Richardson Tech Solutions, a billion-dollar software company, was driving her understated Tesla Model 3 to an important meeting. Despite her incredible success, she preferred to maintain a low profile, often choosing simplicity over flashy displays of wealth. The morning sun cast long shadows across Wilshire Boulevard as Michelle navigated through the light traffic. Her mind was focused on the upcoming presentation that could revolutionize healthcare technology in underserved communities. This project was particularly close to her heart, as she had grown up in one such community before building her empire from scratch. As she stopped at a red light, a police cruiser pulled up behind her. She thought nothing of it initially, but when the lights started flashing, her heart sank. She had been driving perfectly within the speed limit, and her vehicle registration was up to date. Something felt off about this stop. Officer James Brady approached her window with his hand resting on his holster, an unnecessarily aggressive stance for a routine traffic stop. Michelle remained calm, her years of handling high-pressure situations kicking in. She placed her hands visibly on the steering wheel and waited. "License and registration," Brady barked, not even attempting to explain the reason for the stop. As Michelle reached for her documents, she noticed him tense up unnecessarily. She moved slowly, deliberately, knowing all too well how these situations could escalate. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Brady asked, his tone dripping with unwarranted suspicion. "No, officer, I don't," Michelle replied calmly, maintaining her composure despite the growing tension. "I was following all traffic laws." Brady scoffed, examining her license with exaggerated scrutiny. "This vehicle was reported as potentially stolen. We've had a lot of luxury car thefts in this area lately." Michelle felt her chest tighten, but her voice remained steady. "Officer, I own this vehicle. I can prove it right now with additional documentation." As the situation began to draw attention from passers-by, a familiar black SUV pulled up to the scene. The door opened, and former heavyweight champion Mike Tyson stepped out, immediately recognizing Michelle from their shared charity work in youth education. He approached with purposeful steps, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Is there a problem here, officer?" Tyson's voice was calm but carried the weight of his reputation. Brady's demeanor shifted noticeably. "Mr. Tyson? We're just conducting a routine traffic stop." "Routine?" Tyson raised an eyebrow. "I know Ms. Richardson. She's one of the most respected business leaders in our community. Are you certain this stop is about traffic?" The gathering crowd began recording the interaction on their phones. Several people recognized both Michelle and Mike, and whispers spread through the growing audience. Michelle maintained her dignity throughout, even as she felt the familiar sting of prejudice. She had faced similar situations before her rise to success, but her position now offered her a platform to address these injustices. "Officer Brady," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "I understand you're doing your job, but I want to be clear, this stop appears to be based on prejudiced assumptions. I'm happy to provide any documentation you need, but I also want your badge number and the name of your supervising officer." The situation had begun to attract media attention, with local news vans pulling up to the scene. Mike Tyson stayed by Michelle's side, his presence both reassuring and symbolic of the unity against injustice. What started as a discriminatory traffic stop was transforming into a powerful moment of community solidarity. People from nearby businesses emerged, many recognizing Michelle from her extensive community work and technological innovations that had brought hundreds of jobs to the area. As the morning unfolded, this incident would become more than just another case of profiling. It would catalyze a meaningful conversation about systemic bias and the power of community support. Michelle's composed response and Tyson's timely intervention would soon spark a nationwide dialogue about the ongoing need for social change, even in an era where success knows no boundaries. The growing crowd stood witness to a moment that would resonate far beyond that Los Angeles street corner, proving that while some battles are still being fought, the strength of unity and dignity in the face of prejudice remains undefeated. Within hours of the incident, video clips of the confrontation had spread across social media platforms like wildfire. The sight of Mike Tyson standing alongside Michelle Richardson became a powerful symbol of solidarity that transcended celebrity status. But what happened next would reshape the conversation about police conduct in ways nobody expected. Back at her office in the Richardson Tech Solutions headquarters, Michelle sat with her PR team, watching the footage replay on major news networks. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages of support, but she wasn't interested in playing the victim. Instead, she saw an opportunity for meaningful change. "We're not going to handle this the usual way," she announced to her team. "No press releases condemning the police department. No angry social media posts. We're going to do something different." Meanwhile, across town, Officer Brady was facing his own reality check. His supervisor, Captain Rodriguez, had called him in for an immediate meeting. The dashcam footage told a story that couldn't be ignored, a routine traffic stop that had clearly been motivated by prejudice. "What were you thinking?" Rodriguez demanded, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Do you realize the damage this does to our entire department's reputation? We've spent years building trust with the community." As Brady sat in silence, Mike Tyson was making moves of his own. He reached out to Michelle with an unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking," he said over the phone. "What if we turn this into something positive? Something bigger than both of us?" The next morning, local news stations were buzzing with an unprecedented announcement. Michelle Richardson and Mike Tyson were launching a joint initiative, the Bridge the Gap program, aimed at fostering understanding between law enforcement and the community they served. But the real surprise came when Michelle invited Officer Brady to be part of the program's development team. The media was stunned, the public was skeptical, and Brady himself was completely thrown off guard. "Why would you want me involved?" Brady asked during their first meeting, his usual confidence replaced by genuine confusion. Michelle leaned forward in her chair, her eyes holding his steady gaze. "Because real change doesn't happen by excluding people. It happens by helping them understand and grow. You made a mistake, Officer Brady. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" The program took shape rapidly, leveraging Michelle's tech expertise and Tyson's community influence. They developed virtual reality simulations that allowed police officers to experience scenarios from a civilian's perspective, and vice versa. Community members could understand the challenges officers faced, while officers could feel the impact of racial profiling firsthand. Local business leaders, inspired by Michelle's approach, began pledging support. The initiative quickly expanded beyond Los Angeles, catching the attention of police departments and community organizations nationwide. Officer Brady's involvement proved crucial. His willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and work toward change became a powerful testament to the possibility of transformation. In community meetings, he spoke openly about his biases and the wake-up call that forced him to confront them. Mike Tyson's presence at these meetings drew crowds, but it was his candid discussions about his own past encounters with law enforcement that kept them engaged. He shared stories of being profiled before his fame, and even after becoming champion, highlighting how success didn't shield anyone from prejudice. The media coverage shifted from sensationalizing the initial incident to documenting the unprecedented collaboration. News outlets that had initially rushed to fuel outrage now found themselves reporting on a story of redemption and community building. Michelle's approach to handling the situation became a case study in effective leadership. Rather than leveraging her position to punish or shame, she chose to create opportunities for learning and growth. Her billion-dollar company began offering internships to young people from underserved communities, with a special focus on building bridges between different social groups. As weeks passed, the Bridge the Gap program started showing measurable results. Complaints against police officers in participating precincts decreased, while community engagement increased. Other cities began reaching out, wanting to implement similar programs. The story had evolved from a moment of confrontation into a movement of transformation. What could have been another headline about racial profiling had become a blueprint for community healing and systematic change. One afternoon, as Michelle watched a group of officers and community members engage in a program workshop, Mike Tyson joined her. "You know," he said, "sometimes the biggest victories come from the fights we choose not to have." Michelle nodded, thinking about how far they'd come from that morning traffic stop. "The real challenge isn't in pointing out what's wrong," she replied. "It's in being brave enough to work together to make it right." The success of their initiative proved that change was possible when people were willing to step out of their comfort zones and face uncomfortable truths. What started as a discriminatory traffic stop had transformed into a movement that was slowly but surely bridging decades-old divides. 3 months into the Bridge the Gap program, an unexpected crisis emerged that would test everything Michelle Richardson and Mike Tyson had built. A series of leaked police department emails revealed that some officers were actively resisting the initiative, mocking the program behind closed doors, and even attempting to undermine its implementation. The leak hit social media on a Tuesday morning. Michelle was in the middle of a board meeting when her phone started buzzing incessantly with notifications. As she read through the messages, her heart sank, but her resolve strengthened. This was exactly the kind of resistance they had prepared for. "They think this is going to break us," Mike Tyson said during their emergency meeting that afternoon. "But they don't understand, this is exactly why we started this program in the first place." His voice carried the same intensity that once made him the most feared boxer in the world, but now it was channeled into something entirely different. Officer Brady, who had become one of the program's strongest advocates, sat at the conference table, his face pale as he read through the leaked emails. Some were from officers he'd known for years, people he'd considered friends. "I recognize these attitudes," he admitted. "It's exactly how I used to think." Michelle stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. "We're not going to let this derail us," she declared. "Instead, we're going to use this as a teaching moment. These emails? They're proof of why our work matters." The team worked through the night, crafting a response that would turn this crisis into an opportunity. By morning, Michelle had made a bold decision that would once again catch everyone off guard. She invited the officers who had written the most hostile emails to a public forum, not to shame them, but to have an honest dialogue. The forum was scheduled for the following week at the Los Angeles Convention Center. Local news stations prepared to broadcast it live, expecting fireworks. Instead, what they captured was something far more powerful. On the day of the forum, the convention center was packed. The tension in the air was palpable as Michelle took the stage alongside Mike Tyson and Officer Brady. But it was what happened next that left everyone speechless. Instead of confronting the resistant officers with their emails, Michelle shared her own story, not just of the traffic stop that sparked the program, but of her journey from a struggling student in South Los Angeles to a tech billionaire. She talked about the countless times she'd faced discrimination, but focused on the people who had helped her overcome it, including several police officers who had mentored youth programs in her neighborhood. Mike Tyson followed with his own narrative, speaking about his transitions, from a troubled youth to a champion, from a controversial figure to a community leader. His words carried weight as he described how change wasn't just possible, it was inevitable if people were willing to face their own biases. Then, Officer Brady stood up. His hands were shaking slightly as he addressed his fellow officers in the audience. "I know exactly what you're thinking," he began. "I know because 3 months ago, I was you. I thought this program was just another PR stunt, another way to make cops look bad. I was wrong." He went on to share body camera footage from his recent patrols, showing how his interactions with the community had transformed. The footage revealed moments of connection, understanding, and mutual respect that had replaced the tension and suspicion of his previous approaches. As the forum continued, something remarkable happened. One by one, officers from the audience began to stand up and speak. Some defended their resistance, others questioned it, but all engaged in genuine dialogue. The conversation was raw, honest, and at times uncomfortable, but it was real. A young officer named Chen stood up and addressed Michelle directly. "I wrote one of those emails," he admitted. "I thought you were just another rich person trying to tell us how to do our jobs. But watching this program actually work in our community, I was wrong. And I want to be part of the solution." The media coverage that evening wasn't about conflict or scandal. Instead, it focused on the unprecedented honesty of the discussion and the willingness of both sides to listen to each other. The leaked emails, intended to destroy the program, had instead demonstrated its necessity and impact. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. Applications for the Bridge the Gap program tripled. Officers from departments across the country began reaching out, wanting to learn more about implementing similar initiatives in their cities. Michelle's tech company developed a new app that facilitated communication between police officers and community members, allowing for anonymous feedback and suggestions. The app quickly became a vital tool in building trust and understanding between law enforcement and the communities they served. Mike Tyson's involvement evolved as well. He began working with police athletic leagues, creating programs that brought officers and young people together through sports and mentorship. These programs became another bridge, breaking down barriers through shared experiences and mutual respect. As the dust settled from the email controversy, Michelle sat in her office late one evening, reviewing the day's reports. Officer Brady knocked on her door, holding a stack of new program applications. "You know what's different about these?" he asked, a slight smile on his face. "Half of them are from officers who wrote those emails. They're asking to be part of the solution now." Michelle looked out her office window at the Los Angeles skyline, thinking about how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. "Sometimes," she said, "people just need to see that change is possible before they're willing to be part of it." 6 months into the Bridge the Gap program, a late-night incident in South Los Angeles would put everything they'd built to the ultimate test. It started with a routine patrol and ended with a moment that would change countless lives. 2 program graduates, Officer Chen and Officer Brady, were responding to a call about suspicious activity near a community center. As they approached the building, they spotted several teenagers quickly leaving the area. In the past, such a scene might have led to a confrontation. Instead, what happened next showed just how much things had changed. Rather than immediately pursuing the teens, the officers recognized one of them, a participant from their community basketball program. They called out to him by name, their voices calm and familiar. The teenager stopped, turning to face them with obvious relief when he recognized them. "Officers, you need to come quick," the young man, David, said urgently. "We were setting up for tomorrow's youth program when we saw something serious inside the center." What the officers discovered inside the community center would spark a chain of events that no one could have predicted. They found evidence of a sophisticated drug operation being run through the building's basement, but it wasn't local teens involved. The evidence pointed to a larger, more organized criminal enterprise that had been taking advantage of the community's improving police relations as cover for their activities. Michelle Richardson received the call at midnight. "We've got a situation," Officer Brady's voice was tense but controlled. "And we need your help." Within an hour, Michelle and Mike Tyson were at the community center, joining a growing team of law enforcement and community leaders. The discovery had created a dangerous situation, one that could either destroy the trust they'd built or strengthen it beyond measure. "This is exactly what our critics have been waiting for," one of the community leaders said, shaking his head. "They'll say the program made us soft, made us miss what was happening right under our noses." Mike Tyson stepped forward, his expression determined. "No," he said firmly. "This is our chance to show exactly why the program works. We're going to handle this the right way, together." Michelle quickly mobilized her tech resources. Her company's developers worked through the night, creating a secure communication platform that would allow community members to share information anonymously about the drug operation without fear of retaliation. The next few days saw an unprecedented collaboration between law enforcement and the community. Residents who had once been hesitant to interact with police now came forward with information. The teenagers who had first discovered the operation worked with Officers Chen and Brady to document everything they had noticed over the past months. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly resident who had been participating in the program's community outreach events, had been keeping a detailed diary of suspicious activities she'd observed from her apartment window overlooking the community center. "I've lived here for 40 years, she told Michelle during a community meeting. "In the past, I would have been too scared to come forward. But seeing how Officers Chen and Brady interact with our young people, seeing how you and Mr. Tyson have stuck with us, I knew it was time to do my part." The investigation moved quickly but carefully. Rather than rushing in with a heavy-handed approach, law enforcement worked with community leaders to plan each step. Mike Tyson's presence at planning meetings helped keep tensions low and communication clear. When the time came for action, it wasn't just a police operation, it was a community effort. As officers moved in to arrest the drug operations leaders, community members formed a supportive presence, demonstrating the unity that had been built over the past months. The media coverage was immediate and intense. But instead of finding a story about community program failure, reporters discovered something else entirely. They found a community that had grown strong enough to police itself, to recognize problems, and to work with law enforcement to solve them. Michelle used the opportunity to expand the program further. She launched a new initiative that would turn reformed community centers into tech education hubs, giving young people positive alternatives and career opportunities. "What happened here proves something crucial," she said during a press conference. "When police and communities trust each other, when we work together instead of against each other, we're all safer. The old way of doing things, the suspicion, the fear, the us versus them mentality, that's what criminals count on. That's what allows them to operate in our neighborhoods." Officer Brady, standing beside her at the podium, added his own perspective. 6 months ago, those kids would have run from us, and we would have chased them. Instead, they trusted us enough to help us uncover something much bigger. That's not a coincidence, that's what change looks like." The success of the operation brought national attention back to the Bridge the Gap program, but this time for a different reason. Police departments across the country began to see it not just as a community relations initiative, but as an effective law enforcement strategy. Mike Tyson summed it up best during a community celebration event held after the successful operation. "Everyone keeps asking what's different about this program," he said, looking out over the gathered crowd of officers and residents. "The difference is, we stopped trying to fix each other and started working together. Sometimes the strongest punch isn't the one you throw, it's the one you stop yourself from throwing because you found a better way." As the community center was transformed into a beacon of hope and opportunity, Michelle watched young people working alongside officers in computer coding classes, their former suspicions replaced by shared goals and mutual respect. The drug operation that could have destroyed everything they'd built had instead become proof of its success. The success of the community center operation had earned the Bridge the Gap program national recognition, but it was an unexpected visit from Washington, D.C. that would take everything to the next level. A congressional committee wanted to study the program as a potential model for national police reform. Michelle Richardson sat in her office, reviewing the committee's request with Mike Tyson and Officer Brady. The stakes had suddenly become much higher than any of them had anticipated. "They want us to testify before Congress," Michelle said, her voice mixing concern with determination. "This could change everything, not just for Los Angeles, but for the whole country. Mike Tyson leaned forward in his chair, his expression thoughtful. You know they're going to try to pick this apart. They'll look for every flaw, every weakness. We need to be ready. The preparation for the congressional hearing brought together an unlikely group of advocates. Officers who had once resisted the program now volunteered to share their stories of transformation. Community members stepped forward to document how their neighborhoods had changed. Even some of the teenagers who had helped uncover the drug operation wanted their voices heard. As they prepared their presentation, a new challenge emerged. Critics began publishing articles questioning the program's statistics, suggesting that crime rates hadn't really dropped and that the community center success was an isolated incident. Instead of becoming defensive, Michelle saw an opportunity. She invited independent auditors to examine every aspect of the program. She opened the books, shared raw data, and encouraged researchers to conduct their own interviews with participants. Transparency isn't just a buzzword for us, she told her team. It's the foundation of everything we've built. The night before the congressional hearing, something unexpected happened. A video went viral on social media. It showed Officer Chen playing basketball with local kids, but what caught everyone's attention was the conversation captured in the background. The officer and teenagers were discussing their shared experiences with prejudice, their fears, and their hopes for the future. The unscripted moment perfectly captured the program's real impact. The congressional hearing itself became a masterclass in how to present community transformation. Michelle began with cold, hard data, crime statistics, community engagement metrics, and economic improvements in participating neighborhoods. But it was the personal stories that truly captured the committee's attention. Officer Brady's testimony about his journey from skeptic to advocate moved many to tears. He spoke about how the program had not only changed how he policed but how he saw his role in the community. I used to think my job was to enforce the law, he testified. Now I understand that my real job is to help build a community where the law doesn't need to be enforced as often because people trust and respect each other. Mike Tyson's testimony brought a unique perspective. He spoke about his own past experiences with law enforcement, both negative and positive, and how the program was helping to ensure that positive interactions became the norm rather than the exception. But it was the testimony of Mrs. Thompson, the elderly resident who had helped break the drug case, that really drove the message home. She spoke about how, for the first time in 40 years, she felt safe not despite the police presence in her neighborhood, but because of it. The committee members were particularly interested in the technology aspects of the program. Michelle demonstrated how her company's apps and virtual reality training systems were helping bridge understanding gaps between officers and communities. Technology is just a tool, she explained. The real change happens in hearts and minds. What our technology does is create opportunities for those changes to happen safely and effectively. As the hearing concluded, something unprecedented occurred. Committee members from both political parties expressed strong support for the program. They began discussing ways to implement similar initiatives nationwide. Back in Los Angeles, the hearing was broadcast live at the community center. Residents and officers watched together, cheering as their neighbors and colleagues testified. The sight of their local program being recognized at a national level filled everyone with pride. The days following the hearing brought a flood of requests from cities across the country. Police departments wanted to implement the program. Community organizations wanted to partner with it. Tech companies wanted to contribute to its development. Michelle and her team worked tirelessly to create a scalable model that could be adapted to different communities while maintaining the core principles that made it successful. They developed training materials, implementation guides, and support systems for cities wanting to adopt the program. Officer Chen, who had become one of the program's most effective trainers, summed it up during a preparation session for new cities: "This isn't about following a script or checking boxes. It's about creating spaces where people can see each other as human beings first, before any labels or uniforms." The viral basketball video had sparked a trend. Police departments across the country began sharing their own unscripted moments of community connection. The hashtag Bridging the Gap started trending, filled with stories of officers and community members finding common ground. Mike Tyson's role evolved as the program expanded. He began traveling to different cities, using his unique ability to connect with both law enforcement and community members to help launch new initiatives. "You know what I've learned," he shared during one launch event. "The strongest communities aren't built on power or fear. They're built on understanding and respect. That's what this program is really about." As Michelle watched the program grow beyond anything she had initially imagined, she reflected on how it had all started with that traffic stop. What could have been just another negative headline had instead sparked a movement that was changing the face of community policing across the nation. 1 year after the congressional hearing, the Bridge the Gap program faced its biggest challenge yet. A series of high-profile incidents in cities across the country had reignited tensions between police and communities. Critics were quick to question whether the program could work on a national scale. Michelle Richardson was in Chicago, overseeing the launch of a new program site, when the news broke. A police shooting in Atlanta had sparked protests, while in Detroit, a community center similar to their Los Angeles model had been vandalized. The media was drawing connections, suggesting the program was failing. "This is different from what we faced before," Mike Tyson said during an emergency video conference. "We're not just dealing with one community anymore. We're dealing with the whole country." Officer Brady, who had been traveling as a program trainer, shared his observations. "The cities where we're seeing problems are the ones that tried to implement the program too quickly. They wanted the results without doing the real work." Michelle stood at her hotel window, watching the Chicago skyline as she listened to the reports. She'd anticipated challenges with national expansion, but the reality was proving even more complex than expected. "Maybe that's our answer," she said suddenly, turning back to the video conference. "We've been letting cities adopt the program without fully understanding what makes it work. It's not just about the training and the technology, it's about the commitment to real change." The team spent the next week developing a new approach. They called it the Deep Roots Initiative. Instead of trying to implement the full program immediately, cities would begin with a 6-month preparation period focused entirely on building relationships and understanding local dynamics. The Chicago launch became their test case for the new approach. Rather than starting with police training or community programs, they began with simple conversation circles. Officers and residents met in small groups, sharing meals and stories, with no agenda beyond getting to know each other as people. One of these circles produced an unexpected breakthrough. A retired police sergeant and a community activist discovered they had both lost sons to violence. Their shared grief led to a powerful dialogue about fear, loss, and the possibility of change. "We've been standing on opposite sides of a line we drew ourselves," the activist said, his words captured in a documentary being filmed about the program. "Maybe it's time we erase that line." Mike Tyson's role evolved during this period. He began hosting what he called champion circles, gatherings where he brought together police officers and young people who were skeptical of the program. His personal story of transformation resonated with both groups. "I used to think strength was about domination," he told one group in Detroit. "But real strength? That's about having the courage to listen to someone you've been taught to fear." The Deep Roots Initiative started showing results. Cities that adopted the slower, more deliberate approach reported fewer incidents of tension and more sustained community engagement. The program's technology platform evolved to support this approach, with new features that help track relationship-building activities and community feedback. Officer Chen, who had been instrumental in developing the new approach, created a simple but effective metric. "We measure success by the number of times officers are invited to community events and not as security, but as guests," he explained during a training session. The media narrative began to shift as well. Stories emerged about small but significant changes happening in cities across the country. In Atlanta, officers were regularly attending community basketball games, not to police them, but to play. In Detroit, the vandalized community center had been repaired through a joint effort of police and residents. Michelle's tech company continued to innovate, developing new tools to support the program's evolution. They created an app that helped match officers with community members who shared similar interests or experiences, facilitating more natural relationship building. Technology can't create trust, Michelle explained during a TED Talk about the program. But it can create opportunities for trust to develop naturally. The program's impact began showing up in unexpected ways. Cities reported increases in minority recruitment for police academies. Community centers saw more retired officers volunteering as mentors. School resource officers were being invited to family dinners by students' parents. One particularly powerful moment came during a crisis in Philadelphia. When tensions rose after a controversial arrest, instead of protests turning violent, community leaders who had been through the program stepped forward as mediators. They worked with police officials to address the situation transparently and fairly. What we saw in Philadelphia wasn't just conflict resolution, Officer Brady noted during a program evaluation. It was conflict prevention. The relationships were already in place when they were needed most. The congressional committee that had originally reviewed the program conducted a one-year follow-up study. Their findings showed that cities fully committed to the Deep Roots approach had seen significant improvements in police-community relations and decreases in both crime rates and use of force incidents. Back in Los Angeles, where it all began, Michelle and Mike hosted a gathering of program participants from across the country. The event wasn't a formal conference but a celebration of the relationships that had been built. "Look around this room," Mike told the gathered crowd. "A year ago, most of you wouldn't have spoken to each other. Today, you're sharing stories like old friends. That's not just change, that's transformation." As the program continued to evolve and adapt, Michelle reflected on how far they'd come from that traffic stop that could have been just another negative statistic. Instead, it had sparked a movement that was slowly but surely changing the fabric of communities across America. "The real success of this program isn't in the numbers or the statistics," she told a group of new participants. "It's in the moments that never make the news, the daily interactions where people choose understanding over fear, connection over conflict." 18 months after the program's national expansion, an unexpected invitation arrived at Michelle Richardson's office. The White House wanted to recognize the Bridge the Gap program with a Presidential Medal of Freedom, not just for Michelle, but for the entire team that had made it possible, including Mike Tyson and Officer Brady. The announcement sparked a wave of reflection among those who had been there from the beginning. The program had grown far beyond anything they had imagined that morning of the traffic stop, touching lives in ways they never expected. As preparations for the ceremony began, a documentary filmmaker approached them with an idea. She wanted to trace the ripple effects of the program by following the stories of people whose lives had been transformed by it. The resulting stories would prove more powerful than anyone anticipated. There was the story of a young man in Boston who had gone from running from police to running police youth programs. In Miami, a veteran officer who had been on the verge of retiring early due to job stress was now leading community engagement initiatives with renewed purpose. But it was a story from Kansas City that particularly captured the nation's attention. A police officer and a community activist, who had once been bitter adversaries, had together prevented a potentially violent confrontation between protesters and police through their shared connection to the program. "We used to see each other as the enemy," the activist shared in the documentary. "Now we see each other as partners in making our community better." That's what this program really does. It helps you see the person behind the position. The presidential ceremony preparation brought an unexpected challenge. The White House security team had concerns about having Mike Tyson so close to the president. It was a moment that could have derailed everything, but instead demonstrated how far they'd come. The head of the Secret Service detail was actually a graduate of the program from its early days in Los Angeles. He personally vouched for Tyson, sharing how the former boxer's involvement had been crucial in building trust between law enforcement and communities. As the ceremony approached, Michelle's tech company unveiled its most ambitious project yet, a virtual reality experience that allowed people to literally walk in each other's shoes. Police officers could experience routine situations from a community member's perspective, while civilians could understand the complex decisions officers faced daily. The technology was revolutionary, but it was the human stories behind it that made it effective. Every scenario was based on real experiences shared by program participants, making the impact deeply personal and authentic. Officer Chen, who had helped develop the VR scenarios, explained it during a demonstration: "We're not just showing people what others see, we're helping them feel what others feel. That's where real understanding begins." The week before the White House ceremony, tragedy struck. A young participant in the program's youth initiative was killed in a car accident. The response from both the police department and the community showed how deeply the program had changed relationships. Officers and community members came together to support the family. The funeral procession included both police cruisers and community vehicles, a visible symbol of unity in grief. The tragedy brought people even closer together, reinforcing the program's core message about shared humanity. At the White House ceremony, President Thompson spoke about how the program represented the best of American innovation and community spirit. But it was Michelle's acceptance speech that really captured the program's essence. "This medal doesn't belong to me," she began, her voice steady but emotional. "It belongs to every person who had the courage to see past their fears and prejudices. It belongs to every officer who chose understanding over authority, every community member who chose trust over suspicion, and every young person who dared to believe in a better future." Mike Tyson's presence at the podium brought a powerful moment of symbolism. The former heavyweight champion, once seen as a controversial figure, was now being honored at the White House for his role in building peace. "Life has a way of coming full circle," he said, looking out at the gathered audience. "I spent years being feared. Now I get to help people overcome their fears of each other. That's a better victory than any fight I ever won in the ring." Officer Brady's speech focused on the future. He announced the creation of a new initiative within the program, a leadership academy that would train the next generation of police officers and community leaders together, breaking down barriers before they could form. "We're not just building bridges anymore," he explained. "We're raising a generation that won't need bridges because they'll have grown up understanding and respecting each other from the start." The ceremony was broadcast live across the country, with watch parties held in community centers and police stations that had participated in the program. In Los Angeles, at the original community center where it all began, officers and residents gathered together to celebrate. Mrs. Thompson, watching from her apartment overlooking the center, saw groups of teenagers and police officers celebrating together. Some of them were playing basketball, others were simply talking and laughing. It was a scene that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago. The documentary filmmaker captured her reaction. "You know what's beautiful?" Mrs. Thompson said, wiping away tears. "Those young people down there, they don't even realize how special this is. To them, this is just normal now. That's how you know real change has happened." As the White House ceremony concluded, Michelle looked out at the gathered crowd, a mix of police officers, community leaders, program participants, and government officials. She saw in their faces the future they had all worked so hard to build. "This recognition is wonderful," she told reporters afterward. "But the real reward is walking through our communities and seeing people talking instead of fighting, understanding instead of fearing, building instead of destroying. That's the medal we wear every day." 2 years had passed since that fateful traffic stop, and Michelle Richardson found herself back on Wilshire Boulevard, driving the same Tesla Model 3. This time, she wasn't alone. Officer Brady was in the passenger seat, and Mike Tyson followed in his SUV behind them. They were retracing the route that had started it all, but this time for a very different reason. The city had decided to rename the stretch of road where the original incident occurred. It would now be known as Bridge the Gap Boulevard, a permanent reminder of how one moment of potential conflict had transformed into a movement of lasting change. As they pulled up to the exact spot where Officer Brady had once pulled Michelle over, they saw something that made them all pause. A group of young police academy cadets was there, along with students from local high schools. They were part of the program's new joint education initiative, learning about the history that had happened on this very spot. "It's strange being back here," Officer Brady said, stepping out of the car. "I was a different person then. We all were." The street naming ceremony had drawn a crowd that reflected the program's impact. Police officers stood shoulder to shoulder with community members. Children played freely, weaving between uniforms and civilians with equal comfort. News crews set up their equipment, preparing to broadcast the event nationally. But before the official ceremony began, something unplanned and powerful happened. A young officer approached Michelle with tears in her eyes. She introduced herself as Officer Brady's daughter, who had followed her father into law enforcement after witnessing his transformation through the program. "My dad used to come home angry and frustrated," she shared, her voice trembling. "Now he comes home fulfilled. You didn't just change policing, you changed families too." Mike Tyson, who had become a grandfather during the program's evolution, watched as his grandson played with a police officer's daughter near the podium. "Look at them," he said to Michelle. "They don't see uniforms or differences. They just see friends. That's the future we built." The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. The mayor spoke about how the program had reduced crime rates not through force, but through understanding. Community leaders shared stories of transformation. But the most powerful moment came from an unexpected source. A teenager stepped up to the microphone, the same young man who had been playing basketball in that viral video with Officer Chen a year ago. He was now headed to college on a scholarship provided by Michelle's tech company. 2 years ago, I was scared of the police, he admitted to the crowd. Now, I'm studying criminal justice because I want to be part of this change. And I'm not the only one. Look around, this isn't just a program anymore. It's who we are. The impact of the program had extended far beyond its original goals. Cities reported not just improved police-community relations, but better school attendance, increased small business development, and stronger family structures. The program had created a ripple effect of positive change throughout entire communities. Michelle's tech company had continued to innovate, developing new tools for community engagement. Their latest project was an artificial intelligence system that helped identify opportunities for positive interaction between police and communities before conflicts could arise. "Technology can predict problems," Michelle explained during the ceremony. "But it's people who prevent them. What we've built here isn't just a program, it's a new way of seeing each other." Officer Brady, who had become a national trainer for the program, shared how departments across the country had transformed. "We used to measure success by the number of arrests," he said. "Now we measure it by the number of conversations, connections, and lives changed." The documentary about the program had become required viewing at police academies nationwide. It showed not just the successes, but the hard work and honest conversations that made those successes possible. More importantly, it showed that change was possible anywhere people were willing to try. As the ceremony concluded, Mike Tyson led everyone in a moment of silence, not for what had been lost, but for what had been gained. The quiet was broken by the sound of children laughing as they played nearby, a sound that now seemed perfectly natural at a police event. Later that evening, at a community dinner celebrating the street naming, Michelle sat with Mrs. Thompson, who had become something of a grandmother figure to the entire program. The elderly woman watched as officers and residents shared meals and stories together. "You know what the real miracle is?" Mrs. Thompson said, patting Michelle's hand. It's not that we learn to trust the police, or that they learn to trust us. It's that we all learn to trust ourselves to be better than we thought we could be. The program's success had inspired similar initiatives around the world. Delegations from other countries regularly visited to learn from their experience. But Michelle always emphasized that the program's principles were universal, even if its implementation needed to be tailored to each community. What works isn't the program itself, she would explain. What works is the willingness to see each other as human beings first. Everything else follows from that. As the sun set on Bridge the Gap Boulevard, Michelle stood with Mike Tyson and Officer Brady, watching the community they had helped build. Children played basketball with officers on nearby courts. Elderly residents chatted comfortably with patrol officers. Teenagers worked on computers in the community center, preparing for tech careers. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, Mike reflected, watching the scene. One traffic stop, one conversation, one decision to do things differently. Officer Brady nodded, thinking about how far they'd all come. We didn't just bridge a gap, he said. We erased it. Michelle looked at the street sign bearing the program's name, then at the diverse crowd of people who now moved comfortably in each other's presence. What had started as a moment of potential conflict had become a movement of lasting change. The real bridge, she said softly, was the one we built inside ourselves, the bridge between who we were and who we could be. As night fell on Bridge the Gap Boulevard, the lights of the community center glowed warmly, a beacon of hope and possibility for cities everywhere. The story that had begun with tension and fear had transformed into one of unity and understanding, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single moment of choosing hope over fear, understanding over judgment, and possibility over prejudice.